fundamental principles of freedom, national self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Saturday. I guess for you guys, it's afternoon. 5 o'clock Eastern Time, 1 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock Pacific Time. Here in Israel, I'm in Haifa, Israel, and it is 11 p.m. at night. So the time difference between us is expanding, not shrinking. So thank you for joining me. Shows while I'm in Israel will be kind of an off hours for you guys, just because I am 6 hours away from the East Coast, so it's a little tougher for you, a little tougher to do it earlier in the day. Thank you for joining me. Travelogue for days. What are we now? Days 6 and 7 on this trip. We're gonna go all the way to 20 plus, 21, I think. And yesterday I flew from what was it? From Scotland through Berlin to Israel. I find it interesting, the different airports and their attitude to masks. Berlin was very strict. As I told you, I think Brussels was very unstrict, was very lenient. So a lot of people in Brussels, the center of the European Union, the hub of the European Union, very loose in terms of mask restrictions. So a lot of differences. It's interesting. Still have to wear masks on planes. I think British Airways is experimenting with planes with no masks. So hopefully that is a successful experiment, and we soon can get rid of masks on airplanes. I'm certainly looking forward to that. It's a real pain to have to wear a mask on an airplane. Landed in Israel yesterday afternoon, went to my hotel, went to sleep, got up this morning, drove from Tel Aviv to Haifa, where I am right now. I'm in this room at a hotel in Haifa. Probably, I don't know, one of the best views anywhere. It's just magnificent. I'm sitting at the top of the Carmel Mountains, overlooking the Bay of Haifa. The whole place is lit up. You got the whole bay on a nice day. You can see all the way to Lebanon in the north, and you can actually in the northeast. You can sometimes on a really clear day see all the way to Syria. So you can see Syria, Lebanon, and Israel with the Galilee kind of laid out in front with the big Bay of Haifa. And all the lights and everything arrayed in front of you. One of the most spectacular views you'll see anywhere. I've got it right here in my bedroom. So pretty cool hotel room. And yeah, spending a little time with family. So my brother, my sister, one of my sisters, and my parents today, and just hang out. So today was a pretty relaxing day. Yesterday was crazy because it was airplane, airplane, and Ryanair, which is a pretty shitty plane, experience, and then EasyJet, which is mildly better, but not much better. Spent a lot of time in crummy airplanes yesterday. So I want to talk a little bit about, as we do every night, every show, I think, talk a little bit about Ukraine, Russia. It dominates the news. There's almost nothing else out there. And I want to say a few things, because we've talked a lot about strategy. We've talked a lot about who's going to win and what's happening, and the details of that. But I just want to step back for a minute and focus for a minute about kind of what's actually going on in Ukraine right now. And just, I don't know how to do this, but how to give you a good sense of, there's a lot of punditry, there's a lot of people talking about it, there's a lot being written about it. But I don't know if you can, or any of us can have a real sense of the sheer brutality and destruction that is going on. Civilians are dying in Ukraine in large numbers. It's now up to, I think, thousands. Uh, the Russians are being brutal. They are bombing civilian targets. Many of the people left in Ukraine are the elderly. A lot of children have died so far in Ukraine. This is just a brutal and devastating war. Cities are being flattened, and it truly is horrific and truly is sad. And if you think about it, what has Ukraine done to deserve it? What has Ukraine done to deserve? What have Ukrainians done to deserve the death and destruction of their cities? What have they done to deserve thousands and thousands of civilian casualties? What have they done to deserve the devastation? And it's only going to get worse. We're only seeing the beginning of what is going to happen as Russia flounders, or if it doesn't flounder, at least as Russia only advances slowly. What we're going to get is more and more of an attrition war from which civilians will be tried to be starved, supplies will dwindle, brutality will increase in order to speed up progress. You're already seeing that with the Russians. And neither party, neither the Ukrainians nor the Russians, will be in a position to win. They'll just be in a position to brutally kill one another and devastate and destroy each other. For what? I mean, nobody really asked this question, but for what? What is this war about? Now, those who defend Russia say it's about Russia preventing, I don't know, NATO expansion, which was never on the table, and Ukraine was not necessarily supportive of NATO expansion. But even if it was, how many people are you willing to kill so that NATO doesn't expand? How much death and destruction are you willing to inflict on civilian casualties so that NATO doesn't expand? What is the price you're willing to pay for a Russian empire, for a Ukraine that is a satellite of Russia? I mean, is anybody asking Putin these kind of questions? Those who support Putin? Let's say they're right. Let's say, yes, NATO expanded too quickly, and yes, NATO poses, I don't know, not a threat, because nobody can take it really seriously, but a threat certainly to Russian dominance over parts of Eastern Europe. How many people deserve to die? How much devastation is legitimate? How many people, how many civilians, how many non-combatants are supposed to be killed? Old people, young people, babies, children. So that Putin's dream of a greater Russia is fulfilled, or Putin's dream of a NATO further removed is fulfilled. Well, many people are going to die. Tens of thousands of people are going to die. Of course, thousands of Russian soldiers are going to die. But, my sympathy for such Russians is declining all the time as I look at latest polling data out of Poland and out of Russia, and I'm not sure how much you can trust it, but you can trust it as much as you can trust anything coming out of Russia. By Western polling company, not Russian polling companies, which shows that Putin's popularity was in decline, and that the war has actually increased his popularity, that he is now more popular, that he is now dramatically more popular than he was a year or two ago. That indeed Russia support Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Remember, Putin here is the aggressor. There was no aggression. Putin is the one who put 190,000 troops on the border with Ukraine. Putin is the one that has threatened war. And Putin is the one who ordered his troops into Ukraine in an offensive battle against a country that was not his. There is no way one could view the Russian invasion of Ukraine as a defensive action, as an action to protect the lives and property of Russians. It was a political, offensive, expansionary, rights violating initiation of force moved by the Russians against the Ukrainians. It is true insanity to see in the 21st century a country mobilized to go to war. Mobilized to go to war against a country that poses no threat to it. Ukraine, let's be very clear, was not a threat to Russia. Ukraine has no offensive weapons. Ukraine does not have an army that can launch an attack on Russia. There is nothing offensive about Russia. You might not like Ukraine. You might think their government is corrupt. You might think NATO is expanding too much. Okay. But to use that to justify a brutal war of slaughter, a brutal war in your neighborhoods. And look, in a just war, in a war in which the good guys need to win and defeat the bad guys, yes, civilian casualties are a price one was willing to pay. It's a necessary price to win. But here, the Russians are the bad guys. They are killing civilians not out of a desire to bring freedom and liberty or from the perspective of self-defense. There is nothing about the Russian offensive that is self-defense. Russia is unequivocally the offender here, the evil party here. And let me say a little bit about Candace Owens. I'll talk about Israel in a minute, but let's talk about Candace Owens because it's relevant for this. I mean, I never liked Candace Owens. People always, oh, she's the star of the conservative movement. She's so amazing. And yeah, being a black female and being willing to say some of the things she's been willing to say about racism in America and about the left, yeah, it was all refreshing. But it never came across as intelligent, well-founded, well-grounded. And now, I mean, she's just lost it. She's become a mouthpiece for Putin. Here's one of her tweets on March 17th, 2 days ago. 2 days ago. President Zelensky is a very bad character who is working with globalists against the interests of his own people. I will not move 1 inch away from that assessment, ever, no matter how flowery the media depictions of him are. She will never move away from this assessment, no matter what the evidence is, no matter what anybody says. How does she know that Zelensky is a very bad character? No evidence is given. No evidence is suggested. No sources are cited. Working with globalists. I mean, I know there's nothing worse that you can say to somebody more than he's a globalist. Maybe that he's a Nazi, but globalist is like the worst. And who are these globalists? And what is their agenda? And what are they trying to achieve? And how does anything that he did justify a war of aggression by the Russians and the killing of thousands of people in their homes? Nothing. No, she's not suggesting anything. She's completely lost it. And this is not ignorance. I think Candace Owens is ignorance. I think she's always been ignorant. It's the one thing that's always kind of beat at the back of my mind. She doesn't really know what she's talking about. She mouths certain things. The talking points of the new right. Originally, I think she would basically the talking points of Charlie Cook, the head of Turning Point, and then I think she outgrew Charlie. She got bigger than Charlie. Now, who knows who feeds her this stuff? But it's disgusting. Later that same day, she says, wars are government-run money laundering operations from taxpayers. The job of the media is to make the taxpayer agree to war through aggressive, emotional propaganda. People like me, Russell Brand and Tucker Carlson, are enemies of the military-industrial complex. Is that the Russian military-industrial complex? Because as far as I know, the United States has not gone yet to war and probably will not go. But Russia has. Are wars government-run money laundering operations from taxpayers? Is that true of Russia as well as it is of the United States? Or is that just true of people you don't like? Or is that just true of the American government? Now she's channeling Murray Rothbard and the anti-war libertarians who hate American wars. I don't think they object much to other people slaughtering each other. But American wars, America is always evil. Tucker and Candace are not anti-war. They're anti-America. They're anti-American wars. They have no problem in Russia invading Ukraine. Certainly Candace doesn't. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday, she tweeted, Ukraine wasn't a thing until 1989. Now, the ignorance here is on multiple levels. 1989 is the day the Berlin Wall fell, but really the Soviet Union wasn't dismantled until 1991, which I think is what she means. But that is a level of ignorance that is interesting. Ukraine indeed was independent. Pre-takeover by the Soviets. It was within the Soviet Union, kind of a semi-autonomous zone. Why did Lenin and Stalin even allow for that if Ukraine wasn't a thing? Before the Russian Empire, Ukraine had an empire. It basically controlled most of Eastern Europe. There was a period 1,000 years ago. Ukraine's been a thing for a long time. Kiev, indeed, is a much more significant city than if you go back 1,000 years, than Moscow. I mean, Ukraine wasn't a thing? Just look in Wikipedia, Candace. But again, she will do anything to undermine Ukraine and to elevate Putin. And that's what's interesting about this. Why? Why is she doing this? What is it about Putin that they love so much? Well, to some extent, it's what people loved, many Germans loved about Hitler, even when they denied they love Hitler. But what they loved about Hitler is that he was anti-left. What they loved about Hitler is that he hated the communists. What they loved about Hitler was his nationalism and his so-called, quote, patriotism. What they loved about Hitler was his muscles, that he was willing to flex them. And now Hitler was a little, weakling, but he had muscle people around him. Putin, looks buff. But what they love is their adoration of force, their adoration of muscle, their willingness to use it. They deny that they support their positive agenda. In the case of Hitler, you all know the agenda. In the case of Putin, whether it's, it's unclear what his agenda is, but primarily Russian nationalism. What they really love is this, and they say this, Tucker Carlson has said, well, Putin doesn't advocate for critical race theory. He doesn't advocate for, he doesn't try to educate our kids. He would if he took over the United States. Not that I'm saying he will, or that he wants to, but I mean, what they love is his anti-leftist rhetoric. What they love is his nationalism. What they love is, again, his muscle. And they love the invasion. Why did they love the invasion? Because he stuck it to the West. The West today, in the minds of the Candace Owens of the world, is a symbol of globalism, is the symbol of liberalism. It's the symbol of the left. And anything that attacks the West, anything that attacks the United States, particularly under a Democrat administration, anything that attacks Western Europe is good. I've been telling you this for a long time. That once you place the left as your only target, you will hand over power to evil men. You will end up supporting evil causes. We do not share an agenda with Candace Owens. I do not anyway, maybe some of you do. She is not my ally in any battle, in any fight. She will not lead us anywhere but to hell. She and the whole, the Tucker Carlsons and ultimately the Donald Trumps of the world. Yes, they sound good when they attack the left, maybe. But their attacks are meaningless when their ultimate ideas are just as bad in a sense of what they will do to this country. They are not our allies. They are not our friends. We share nothing in common. Nothing. We should stay away from them as far as possible. Candace was also a big vaccine expert. She was anti-vax. She declared, if you remember, I mentioned this on one of my shows, that Big Pharma was the biggest evil in the world. I think now she thinks Ukraine is the biggest evil in the world. Or maybe Biden's the biggest evil in the world. I don't know. But it's certainly not. But she used to think it was Big Pharma. Big Pharma. Candace doesn't own the left. She doesn't own the right. She's just a pathetic, ignorant evader. She evades reality. She ignores the facts. And her arguments against the left are weak because she has nothing positive to offer except the bromides, the old bromides of nationalism and kind of xenophobia and a love of Putin. Putin, a thug, nothing but a thug, a KGB thug. But that's what the right is about today. That's what the collectivist right is about. All right. So, that's my little spiel on. She's just horrible. I mean, really is horrible. And this is the queen of the right. Liam Miller says Candace Owens interview with Alex Epstein was good. It seems without an objectivist base, and even the best on the right can't stay rational for long. She was never the best on the right. The fact that she did a good interview of Alex Epstein needs to be viewed as an accident. The fact that she's anti-global warming has nothing to do with science, has nothing to do with her love of humanity, has nothing to do with her love of energy or her understanding of economics. It's an accident because the right tends to be anti-global warming. So she'll ask Alex good questions. Alex is good. Cook says, Candace Owens said, leftism and atheism are a package deal. They're the same. They're together. They can't be separated. That's the quality of you get. That's why she belongs with Dennis Prager. They share that. I wonder what Dennis thinks of her views of Russia and Ukraine. Andrew says, Candace Owens, like Trump, says America does bad things too. Do you think an underlying pacifism? Or what do you think causes that moral equivalency? No, it's not a pacifism at all, because Trump said that about America. This is the point. I think this was the point in 2016 where I knew that Donald Trump was a villain. it was an interview before the election. I can't remember when it was, but it's on YouTube. You can find the interview. It was an interview that he did, and when he talked about Putin, and he said some very positive things about Putin. And the interviewer said something like, "Yeah, but Putin kills journalists. He kills his own people. He kills journalists within his own country." And Donald Trump said, "Yeah, kind of, we kill people too. We're the same thing." So it's not a pacifism, and it's not even a moral equivalency. I mean, Donald Trump admires Putin. Candace Owens admires Putin. They admire his willingness to kill journalists. And they use the moral equivalency in a sense to hide the fact that they really want us to be like authoritarian Russia. They really want us to behave like that. They admire strongmen. I mean, Donald Trump, throughout his presidency, repeated this over and over and over again. He expressed many times his admiration for Xi and the respect that Xi gets in China. He wished people would respect him in America like Xi is respected in China. He had great admiration and gave great leeway to Erdogan in Turkey. And clearly, he showed immense respect and admiration for Putin on a number of occasions, including that famous press conference that he gave where he took Putin's word over American intelligence agencies. In public. One thing to have doubts in private, but in public. Trump, in that sense, hates the United States. He hates the United States as the founders imagined it, as the founders created it. He hates the United States of freedom and individualism, separation of powers, and a weak executive. Now, Trump despises this country if it's a country of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and Hamilton. He is the opposite of the founders. So these people admire Putin, they admire authoritarians, and they want America to be like them. I mean, how much would Trump give to be able to bump off Bezos because of what the Washington Post wrote about him, or shut down the Washington Post? He would have loved it. He has no respect or admiration for the idea of free speech. No respect or admiration for any aspect of the Constitution. And this is true of Candace. They don't understand the Constitution. They don't care about the Constitution. Indeed, they want to overturn the Constitution. I mean, it's clear in his fantasy about the election that he doesn't care who won the election. He doesn't care about an electoral process. He doesn't care about the rule of law. He cares about winning. Nothing else matters. And winning, nothing else matters, is Putin. So I think what underlies the moral equivalency is a disgust with American freedom, a disgust with the lack of a strong centralized presidency, a disgust with an America that is weak, which it is. It's not that he's disgusted with war. I mean, Trump would not hesitate to go to war if he thought he could win it, if it was his war, if he decided to go to one. I mean, again, this is why Candace Owens supports the Russians, right? She's not against war. They're not pacifists at all. So, no, there's no pacifism there. All right, let's see. Whoops. Um, yes, I want to talk about Israel. So I am in Israel. It's always interesting to be here. Uh, it's always stunning for me, particularly in the last few years, to drive from the airport into Tel Aviv. You drive through this corridor that passes through what now is kind of this canyon of skyscrapers on both sides of the highway, none of which existed when I 30 years ago when I was here in Israel. It's an area right by the military base that I was stationed at. None of that exists anymore. Again, it's replaced by skyscrapers. The lights, the colors. I mean, Tel Aviv is a vibrant, alive city. It's interesting that in a recent, and I can't remember what newspaper published this, but they found Tel Aviv to be the most expensive city in the world in terms of the cost of living. It was more expensive to live in Tel Aviv than in Tokyo or Singapore or Paris or London or New York City. Super expensive, partially because of the demand by wealthy Russians, wealthy Ukrainians, wealthy French, wealthy American Jews, all who've got apartments, condos in Tel Aviv, wealthy Israelis. The success of the tech industry has created a lot of Israelis. So it's always fun to drive through Israel to see how much it's changed since I lived here. Even Haifa, which is a relatively sleepy city, has whole areas that are new and thriving and bustling, and it really is, it is fun to see. I don't have a really good sense of how Israel doing. It depends on who you talk to. COVID was dealt here with a strict iron hand, real lockdowns, and I think that have made it very hard for small businesses. On the other hand, money was printed, but I don't have a good sense of the Israeli economy, how it's doing relative, let's say, to the United States and other places around the world. It has incredibly productive people. It has a vibrant tech sector that was not like Silicon Valley that affected by the lockdowns. If anything, it might have increased productivity. People working at home maybe worked better. Hard to tell. Unemployment is almost non-existent in Israel. There are plenty of jobs. It is a country, though, that is split and internally, and is constantly fighting. Violence is up in Israel. Both crime is up. Violence within the Arab sector is dramatically up. Arab on Arab violence, if you will, among Israeli Arabs, not Palestinians, is up. There's immense frustration within the Arab community. It's become more religious over the last 30 years and become much more anti-Israeli over the last 30 years. It is, there's a lot of tension between secular Jews and religious Jews. Tomorrow, one of the big-time rabbis in the ultra-Orthodox community is having is being buried. He died, and there's a funeral. They expect 1 million people, to show up for this funeral. I mean, that is just in so many ways barbaric, primitive, backwards, in one of the most advanced, civilized, progressive countries in the world. And there is that immense tension in Israel between the ultra-Orthodox, the extremely religious, and a mostly secular society that values tradition, values its Jewishness, if you will, but it's nowhere near, but it's not fanatically religious, versus 1 million people, fanatics, going to a funeral of a great religious leader, great in quotes. Right? it's a very troubled country in that sense, split and divided in so many ways. There's the Ashkenazi Sephardi, which manifests itself in politics. There is the elites versus the common people. There is left versus right, although the left in Israel is far tamer in almost every respect than the left in the United States or the left in Europe. And religious secular, Arab Jew. Truly a country of tension, stress, challenges, conflict. And that we haven't even mentioned its external enemies, who are, significant, non-trivial. Israel signed a peace agreement with United Arab Emirates not that long ago. Well, just yesterday I heard that Assad, the brutal, horrific dictator of Syria, just visited the UAE and has established a friendly relationship with them. And this is a real enemy of Israel, an ally of Iran, an ally of the Hezbollah. Re-establishing relations after 10 years, because during the civil war in Syria, the United Arab Emirates supported his enemies. So re-establishing relationship with Assad. What does that mean in terms of their relationship with Israel when they establish relations with one of Israel's biggest enemies? Israel is, I sit here in Haifa, I can see Lebanon. Certainly during a clear day, I can see Lebanon. In other words, I can see where the Hezbollah will be shooting rockets at this, at exactly my location. This is a perfect target for them. It's up on a hill. And they have thousands of rockets, and far more sophisticated rockets than they had in the past, because they've got them from the Iranians. In the south, of course, you got the Gaza Strip with Hamas. So Israel has a precarious situation from all fronts. And that brings me to Ukraine and Russia. Israel has a law. Israel has a law that says that any Jew who wants can come to Israel and become a citizen. It's interesting that the law written after World War II defines a Jew in the same way the Nazis did. In a sense, it adopted the Nazi definition because it's a law that is trying to protect against the Nazis. And that law says that if you're a quarter Jewish, if you have one grandparent that's Jewish, you can come and get citizenship in Israel. But as part of the conflict between secular and religious, the religious Jews are offended by this. No, they say. A Jew is only a Jew if they were born by a Jewish mother, and that Jewish mother is only a Jewish mother if her mother was Jewish, going back all the way to, I guess, the beginning of time. So there are people who define themselves as Jewish all over the world. In particular, there is a large community of Jews in Ethiopia that is being persecuted and is in the middle of a civil war in Ethiopia that wants to come to Israel. Now, many Ethiopian Jews made it to Israel, but the rabbis define, many of them, tried to fight the idea that they were even Jewish. Well, these Ethiopian Jews are blocked from coming in to Israel. In Ukraine today, there are many Jews escaping Ukraine, mostly older. The young have already left. They are being welcomed into Israel. And there's an outcry of racism here. Why are they accepting white Ukrainian Jews without too much proof that they're Jewish? I mean, just think of kind of the mental gymnastics one has to go through here. And they're not accepting Jews from Ethiopia because the color skin is different, or because the rabbis can't make up their mind about who's Jewish and who's not. But there's definitely a color skin issue going on here. There's a cultural issue going on here. Again, another area in which Israel is torn. The story is right now in Israel that so many Russian Jews have left Russia, not Ukraine, Russia, because it's not comfortable. They can't tweet. They can't go on Facebook. They can't get McDonald's. They can't go to Starbucks. They don't want to be in Russia during these times of sanctions. It's tough. That every apartment available for rent in Israel is taken up by Russian Jews that are spending time in Israel while things cool down, or maybe will cool down one day in Russia. So, again, a country torn. What do they do with these people? Well, I mean, there's nothing to do with them. It's fine that they're here, but Israelis are upset because this is raising rents and taking away apartments from other people. And then Ukrainian Jews who they're trying to get to immigrate to Israel as they leave Ukraine. Israel's supposed to be supplying resources at the borders to try to get them here. Well, it's under-resourced. Many of the Jews are getting to the point where they've decided that it's just not worth it. And they are going other places. The ineffectiveness of the Israeli bureaucracy is just unbelievable. To help people, they claim they want to help. To bring people to Israel, they claim to want to bring people to Israel. It's just pathetic and unique. There are a lot of Russian Jews, a lot of Ukrainian Jews who live in Israel, who live today in Israel. They are now torn. So, Israel's a mess. Always has been a mess. In many respects, always will be a mess. Israel is a land of contradictions. It is based on basically an unhealthy premise as a Jewish state, as an ethnocentric state. Unhealthy, maybe necessary in terms of the survival of Jews, given the anti-Semitism that's prevalent around the world. By the way, one of the challenges Israel has in terms of its support for Ukraine and Russia is Ukrainians in their history have been unbelievably anti-Semitic. Russia, of course, is in Syria. I can see Syria from here. And Israel has a deal with Russia that it can use we can basically do what it wants in the airspace of Syria without getting into conflict with the Russians. So it has a certain reason to support Russia in this conflict, not because of the conflict, but because it's got to deal with Russia and it doesn't want to spoil its chances there. It also doesn't particularly has issues with the Ukrainians. On the other hand, Israelis also completely recognize, have no doubt, that Russia is the aggressor and Ukrainians are the just party here. But Israeli politicians are having a hard time navigating the whole situation. I think they've become in the last few days significantly stronger in their condemnation of Russia than they were at the beginning of the conflict. I think the sheer brutality of the Russian army is forcing them to take a moral stand, as indeed they should. So Israel is founded on in a sense, an immoral premise that is, in some ways, because of the immoral nature of the world around us and the craziness of the world around us, necessary for them. It's Jewish nationalism. It's the only way Jews can survive in the world, or at least they think they can survive in the world. And Israel was founded on the basis of Kantian intellectuals. It was founded in great intellectual sin, with great intellectual problems. And there are consequences to this, and you're seeing the consequences. You see the consequence within Israeli society and the conflicts that arise within it, and you see it in the position it has in the world, and also in its lack of self-esteem and self-assertiveness. So it's a challenging place, and it's challenged This crisis in Ukraine has really caused it a challenge. Those of you who think of Israel as somehow white or somehow, I don't know, even ethnocentric, Israel's not really ethno-nationalist because Judaism is not an ethnicity. I don't know what Judaism is exactly. It's some aspiration to a shared religion, but it's not an ethnicity. I mean, there's very little genetic similarities between me and my wife, or me and Jews from Yemen, who are very, very dark skinned, clearly Jews, or Jews from Ethiopia. Very little genetic similarities between us. And yet they're all here in Israel. You've got over 50% of Israelis are Sephardic Jews who are darker skinned, have different features than Northern European Jews. The idea of Israel as some kind of white nation is bizarre and insane. And it shows a complete ignorance of the place. They are black Jews. Again, Ethiopia, Yemen, and other places in Africa. They're Indian Jews. Jews that come from India. They are Chinese Jews. So Israel is a complicated, complex, bizarre place. It's a troubled place. It's a troubled place. And it always will be troubled because nationalism is not a good thing. Jews are not a race. Jews are not an ethnicity. It's over 50% Sephardic Jews. They're more than 50%. Judaism is a religion, but I don't know, significant number of Israeli Jews are atheists. So what does it mean that it's a religion if so many Jews are atheists? It's a very amorphous, undefined term. It basically is, if your mother was Jewish, if your mother declared herself Jewish, if her mother was Jewish, and if her mother was Jewish, you're a Jew. And that could go back a long time. And if your origins are somewhere 3,000 years ago in this part of the world, right here, you're probably a Jew. Or not. Who knows? So no, nationalism, which is the placement of the nation above the individual, is evil through and through. And to the extent that Israel is collectivist and nationalist, it's evil. It's bad. Luckily, Israeli society has strong influences of individualism. It's basically a free society. It's a relatively prospering and innovative. It's a very innovative society which couldn't exist under extreme collectivism, and you've got elements of individualism here. But at the core, at the essence of all nationalism is an evil, which is collectivism. And Israel, because it has these strong collectivistic elements and also individualism, has this constant clash. A clash that the rest of the Western world is now experiencing. Like in America, we're seeing this clash. And this clash is a consequence of the rising collectivism in a fundamentally individualist country that generates conflict and struggle and clashes. Tribalism. Tribalism is the manifestation of collectivism. But nationalism is never right. Tribalism is never right. Collectivism is never right. Nationalism, again, is placing the collective, the nation, as above the individual, is never right, even when it's chosen voluntarily. Not all, murderers choose to murder. The fact that you do something voluntarily doesn't make it right. Doesn't make it right. Even if everybody consented to making murder okay, it wouldn't make murder okay. Just because everybody consents to nationalism doesn't make nationalism right. It makes it evil, and the consequences are decay and decline. Again, Israel thrives because important parts of it, important parts of the fabric of Israel is anti-collectivist. It's fundamentally individualism. Nationalism does not equal patriotism. Patriotism is the love of the nation when the nation deserves it. It's a love of a good country. Now, patriotism can also be evil. You can't be patriotic to Nazi Germany, or you can, but it's not a good thing. Of course, you could have countries. The Founding Fathers were not nationalists. They created a country of non-nationalist, of anti-nationalist. Nationalism is not okay. It is, again, it is evil in the sense of placing the individual at the service of the state, making the state the focal of your attention. That is wrong and evil. All right. Nations can exist without nationalism. America existed without nationalism for a long time. Let's see. All right. As you all know, Super Chat is available. We have goals for the Super Chat. We don't have Catherine today. Last time she was here, Super Chat delivered $1,000. So she's not here today, so we're going to have to do something without her. I haven't done well so far, so we're only at $100 and something, so hopefully $120. Hopefully you guys can step it up. I'm taking questions. Only $20 above questions just because it's late. It's 8 minutes to midnight over here, so I would like to get some sleep tonight. But happy to answer $20 or more questions. It would be great if there are people out there who are willing to do $100 or $50 just to get us closer to the goal of 600, which is usually our goal. 300-400 would be great given the shorter programs, given the weird hours. Also, we've got about 115 people watching live. Don't forget to like the show if you like the show before you leave. So press the like button. That is really appreciated. So keep it up. All right, let's see. I've got one $50 question, so I'm going to take that even though it's not on topic, and then we'll get to the other questions after that. But yeah, Super Chat's a call tonight. Contributions to the Iran Book Show a call tonight. The Travelogue, traveling is obviously is income reducing, at least when it comes to the show. So I'm going to have to take into account my travel fees in the future to take into account the lost income from Super Chat, because it's, you guys have been super generous lately, and that has all plummeted with the travel schedule. So we will see. All right. Shazbad asks for $50. Can you give a quick review of A League of Their Own? $50 worth. Sure. A League of Their Own is, for those of you who don't know, is based on a true story. It's a story of a women's baseball league that was founded during World War II, while the men were off at war, and basically Major League Baseball shut down because its players were off fighting. They created an alternative league of women, and it's the story of the women's league. It's the story of one of the teams. In particular, it's a story of two sisters who join the team. Wes, thank you. Really appreciate it. Supporting the Travelogues. Thank you, Wes. It's a story of two sisters who join the team. One is a pitcher and one is the batter. And the one who's a pitcher is clearly more talented. So there's an element of the conflict between them. Both of them, I think, are flawed. The very talented sister, the one who is particularly talented, she loves the game, but she refuses, in a sense, she refuses to acknowledge her love of the game. She refuses to embrace it. She doesn't take it as seriously as you think she should, given how much she loves it. It's clearly part of her life. in the end, she gives it up, and she and this is again based on a true story. She gets married and she gives baseball up, even though she's it's her passion. She comes back for the final game of the finals of the equivalent of the World Series. Um, so it's got kind of the personal drama that's involved in it. It's got kind of the political drama of it's not really politics, but it's kind of political in its feel, in the sense that there's a lot of resistance to a women's league. There's a lot of skepticism to a women's league. But then when they start playing and they're pretty good and it's exciting and they're giving their all to the game, it really catches on and people embrace it and people like it. And then as soon as the men come back, they want to shut it down. I don't have any problem with that, in the sense that baseball is a business and it has to make money. Ultimately, I think the league did go on after World War II for a while, for a few years, and did okay. But it can't compete with the Major League Baseball. I mean, women and men are different. I know it's a shock to all of you, but men's baseball is more fun and there's more talent than women's baseball, and you can see that in what people watch. That's generally true of men's sports. The men are just better than women. Yeah, as I said, I was talking about the two sisters before, right? So the issue with the two sisters, the one who's talented doesn't take it seriously. The one who takes it seriously, she views it as a way to escape the country life. So they're both from the country. I can't remember what state. And the older one, the better one, is also, she just wants a country life. Now, in the end of the movie, you see her years later as an old woman. Is a country life good for her? It's unclear. She doesn't look particularly happy, which is interesting in the movie. The younger one wants to get out. She wants to live life, and it looks by the end of the movie that she's really lived a life. She's the more flamboyant one, the more excited one, particularly when she's older. So you get a sense, at least, it gives you a sense and of kind of the quality she had. But on the other hand, she's also envious or jealous. Sometimes it's envy of the fact that her sister's better than her. But I think part of what makes her mad is that her sister's better than her, but doesn't appreciate it, doesn't live it, doesn't take it seriously, doesn't use it as a reason to escape the dull, boring life on the farm and embrace the exciting life that baseball makes possible for them. I think one of the exciting things about the movie is it shows these women using baseball as a platform from which they can live better lives. They can escape the drudgery. And I think World War II was a turning point, because World War II for women was a time when they went out and worked. They went out and replaced the men. They worked in heavy industry. They worked in a variety of different jobs because all the men were out fighting. And when they came back, and I think this explains a lot of what happened in the 60s, when they came back, they were shoveled back to the home. So when they came back, they were expected to go back to cooking and taking care of the kids and taking care of the house and all of that. And by the 60s, they rebelled against that. And they had seen what it was like for a woman to work. And they had seen that they could do it. They achieved amazing things during World War II. So sociologically, it seems clear to me that there was this evolution of the woman's role from, again, from kitchen and home to, in time of emergency, we need them to do the work. They can do the work, but then they're shoveled back into the kitchen and home, and then I think, into the baseball field. And then when the men come, by the time the 50s come around and they're portrayed in television as these nice housewives, they rebel against they reject it. And they embrace, and I think that's where the women's lib really, really comes from, and it motivates the women, and it's why women have advanced so much. I mean, I think it's mostly for the good, not all of it, mostly for the good, because women are in a much better situation today than they were 50 years ago, than they were in the 50s, right? 50s that everybody longs for, both left and right. The left because of unions, and the right because of family. And I think this is where the left and the right are the same, right? They both want this idyllic, almost socialist, kind of everybody in their place world. What they don't want is change. What they don't want is entrepreneurs. What they don't want is change. Change, I think, captures it. So, what else can I say about A League of Their Own? Look, it's funny. It's entertaining. Madonna is in it. She's pretty good. Oscar 6793 says it's probably her best movie. I don't know enough about Madonna's movies, but yeah, I thought she was pretty good. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was fun. So I definitely recommend the movie as a fun, entertaining, fun characters, motivated. They want to win. It's just like any sports movie. I love sports movies because they, in a sense, they play good guys and bad guys. But it's more. It's not so much about the bad guys. Sports movies are all about the good guys and what it takes to win and what it takes to be successful. And this movie is no exception. It's what does it take this group of women coming from all these different backgrounds to gel into a team, to be motivated as a team to go out and win. And yeah, like any sports movie, it's inspiring in that sense. Schwarzer says, that was more than $50 worth. Here is some more. I wanted to ask you while the memory was still fresh in your mind. Thank you. Yes. And I know I still owe you a movie review. I'm struggling a little bit to find a platform that has the movie. I thought HBO had it, but I can't seem to play it. When it gets up on HBO and I press play, it says this movie cannot play. So, and I owe Star Trek, and I owe Dave Goodman a movie, and I'll get to all of those soon, I hope. Noel says, your objective evaluation of Israel, your country of birth, makes you a hero and a true objectivist to me. Thank you, Noel. But yes, I mean, I've always, well, not always, but certainly since I've become an objectivist, over the years, I've become more and more tuned to Israel, both strengths and weaknesses. And look, I left Israel. I left Israel very clear-eyed, knowing why I was leaving. I left because of the collectivism, and going to America, which I thought was the one place of great opportunity, which it turned out to be. I'm not wrong, but it did disappoint gravely in terms of its direction. So one of the saddest things in the world right now is to see my chosen home, America, become more like my birth home, Israel, rather than, and so Israel's become more like America, and America's become more like Israel, and a kind of meeting in the middle. I would have liked America to become more like America, become more American, if you understand what American means. All right, we're at $290 to a large extent, thanks to Shazbot, who's given over a third of that. I'm sure there's some others who can help us get to the $600 mark. That would be great. I'm going to get to everybody's questions. I'm going to start with $20 questions, and I'm going to go through them. So I will get to everybody's. Let's go to the top of the list. Let's see if there's a $20. Yes. But where is Danks? Let me see if Danks. Yes, I see your question. 25, Ron. I'll get to it. I promise. Oh. Okay, let me answer this question just because it pisses me off and because it's kind of on topic. How can you say Maya Shaimer is wrong on Ukraine when he predicted 6 years ago that the West is sending Ukraine on a path of destruction? He was spot on. No, the West did not send Ukraine on a path of destruction. Russia is destroying Ukraine, not the West. So his whole framework is to blame the West, and that's BS. When the framework should be, I mean, if he said something like, look, Russia is irrational. Putin is nuts. He's a thug, and he wants to reestablish the Russian Empire. And really, the West has two alternatives: accept Ukraine into NATO today, or Russia will invade because the Russians are thugs. Then I would have said, yeah, he's right. He's right. So he understood, in some sense, the collectivism, the nationalism, the irrationality, the thuggery of the Russians may be better than anybody else. Fine. But he doesn't put moral blame on that. He puts moral blame on the West. I mean, the answer, if the West cared about Ukraine 6 years ago, was to make them a member of NATO immediately. And that would have prevented Russian invasion of it. It's the West dithering about adding Ukraine to NATO, which has resulted in this. But all the blame for this is on Russia. All the blame for this is on the nationalist philosophy of Putin and Dugin and all the reactionary Russian philosophers and thinkers and intellectuals. And to blame anybody else is just morally offensive. There is no moral blame on the West. There is no issue on the West. Ukraine has every right as a sovereign nation to decide who to align itself with. Aligning with NATO is not a threat to Russia, not an objective threat to Russia. I don't care how Putin sees it. Putin is irrational. You don't take the side of the irrational. You don't say, oh, everybody's to blame. No, Putin is to blame, unequivocally. If Putin was objective, not an objectivist, just objective, he would know that NATO is not a threat to Russia. And why would he care if Ukraine becomes part of NATO? He cares because he said why he cares. I mean, you guys need to read his speech before he went to war. He made it very clear that Ukraine is part of a greater Russia. It's part of the soul of Mother Russia. His explanations were 100% nationalism, mysticism, irrationalism. The West has no blame. The blame lies squarely and completely on the side of Russia here. This is not, there's no, either you're a sovereign nation or not. And if Ukraine's a sovereign nation, they get to decide who to treaty with. If Russia doesn't like it, tough. That doesn't give them one iota of a fraction of a right to invade a country and kill thousands of its women and children. Not one right. I mean, the idea of morally justifying Putin is disgusting. Why? Because Ukraine wanted to be under the NATO umbrella. It turns out Ukraine was right. NATO has never made a claim for any Russian soil. NATO has never suggested attacking Russia. NATO would never attack Russia. NATO is a purely defensive alliance. Anyway, it's sickening to me personally and as an intellectual, the moral equivalence that is going on here, the giving Putin any kind of justification, the fact that U.S. controls NATO is irrelevant. U.S. is not an aggressor nation on Russia. It's not Russia's enemy. Russia is U.S.'s enemy. but the U.S. is not Russia's enemy. Not Russia. Maybe Putin's enemy, but not Russia's enemy. U.S. has no territorial claim on Russia. U.S. has never invaded Russia. There's no interest in invading Russia. And the only reason Putin cares about the U.S. is that he knows they won't invade. That's why he's willing to invade Ukraine and not worry about the U.S. He knows we won't get involved. We do Muslims because they attack us. God, now you're going to make America the guilty party on, you're buying into Ron Paul's line completely. So it's 9/11 was America's fault. We do Muslims. God. How quickly people forget, how quickly people negate reality. It's truly unbelievable. Yeah, I'm funded by Soros. Soros and the Open Society Foundation gives me millions of dollars every year. That's why I hate Putin. Because the only reason to hate Putin is if Soros is funding you. The fact that he stands philosophically for everything I hate, I oppose, has nothing to do with it. It's all economics. And, Soros and I were both Jewish and we're both hedge fund managers. He's a bit bigger and richer than me. So therefore, it must be that Soros is funding me. Cobb, you're quite an idiot. Dunks, NATO bombed Belgrade for 80 days. Defensive, yeah, but it didn't take... notice that NATO didn't take over Belgrade. It didn't take over Serbia. It didn't insist that the Serbs replace their president. They prevented... or they, at least the claim, and by the way, I was against NATO bombing Belgrade, but they were doing that because in order to prevent the Serbians from slaughtering women and children in Kosovo. So it wasn't an expansionary move and an attempt to expand, and then Serbia is still not part of NATO and not part of the EU, and was never occupied by the EU. Kosovo, it was a civil war. NATO took sides, but I don't think it should have. Wasn't for that war, but it wasn't because it was somehow trying to expand into it. And Russia has nuclear weapons. What exactly is NATO going to do to Russia? NATO bomb, yeah, they did. One way to prevent NATO from bombing you is not to massacre people. Let's see. Michael asks, one of the reasons we haven't collapsed because intellectuals over decades have become marginally more sympathetic to markets. A great understanding that a degree of economic freedom must be preserved. Yeah, there is a certain commitment to a mixed economy. Our intellectual class is not committed to Marxism, is not committed to out and out socialism. At least not the ones who actually count. Even somebody like Paul Krugman claims to be, committed to markets. Even, what's her name, Elizabeth Warren claims a commitment to markets. There's a certain shallow, primitive understanding that some markets are better than none. But I think the reason we haven't collapsed is because the Enlightenment has deep roots in the American people, not so much in its intellectuals, but in the people, and in the people of Western Europe. That is, it is because of the Enlightenment has made so much progress among the people that the politicians and some intellectuals have to appease the people to some extent by claiming to be pro-markets, right? So it really is a testament to the amazing reach and amazing impact that the Enlightenment had on the way we think about the world in almost every aspect. And now, while the intellectuals have rejected the Enlightenment, the common people have not. They don't know anything about the Enlightenment, but have not rejected the fundamental values of the Enlightenment, a certain respect for reason and a certain respect for individuals. They still want to live lives free of meddling, at least for the most part. Sadly, they're willing to give up more and more and more of their freedoms, but they generally want to be free. And every time there's a move towards authoritarianism in the West, it is quashed by a shift in the opposite direction because people don't really want it. NATO, let me just to clarify a few things about NATO and Iraq. NATO did not invade Iraq. The United States did with a few allies. The invasion of Iraq was not, well, what did he say? It was not wrong, wrong from the perspective of Iraq. Iraq had no sovereignty. It was ruled by a brutal dictator. It had threatened the United States in a variety of different ways. It was a wrong war from the United States' perspective. It was not in the self-interest of the United States. But the Iraqis should have celebrated the war. It was a war that ultimately liberated them from one of the most brutal dictators of the latter 20th century. So the whole view of the Iraq war, I've talked about this, is completely absurd, right? Yes, it's a wrong war, it's an immoral war, but not because it hurt the Iraqis. The Iraqis deserved everything they got. It was wrong from the perspective of the Americans who had to fight it, the Americans who had to fund it, the Americans who had to die for it. They're the ones who are wronged. The injustice is not towards Iraq. The injustice is towards America and towards the West. So the governments of America and the governments of the West engaged in war in Iraq, which was not a NATO war, they were wronged. Those governments wronged their own people, not the people of Iraq. Again, the people of Iraq deserved it. They tolerated a horrific, brutal dictator who initiated force in other countries and who threatened free countries left and right, funded terrorism. Now, again, I don't think it justifies a war from the American perspective, but getting rid of Saddam Hussein, cool. Absolutely moral and good. It's amazing that the Blame America crowd, I'm not really trying to convince them, but I know that for every one of the people in the Blame America crowd that's saying what they're saying, there are people on the fence. And I'm trying to get to the people on the fence. Let me see, what was I, yes, I was going to say that, and I was going to say one other thing about it. Yeah, anyway, we'll leave it. Dan B, $100, thank you. He says, have you heard Peikoff's lecture on madness and modernism? Discusses similarities of modern art and schizophrenia. There was a murder at MoMA by a crazy person. It is unreasonable to relate the story to some of the points in his talk, even if just anecdotal. No, I don't think it's unreasonable. I have to admit, I remember his talk on schizophrenia, but I remember listening to it. I think I was there live, but I don't remember the details. But there's no question that modernism and schizophrenia are related. There's no question that modern art is a reflection of a crazy society, and that by elevating modern art, only by the intellectual, that the intellectuals elevating modern art causes brain damage. Because innocent people who don't have the intellectual framework to understand the con that is being perpetrated on them, which modern art is, one big con game, it creates massive confusion, deep confusion. Not just simplistic confusion. Art is very fundamental and essential to the human soul. And by elevating modern art, when I did my talk on modern art, I put up a picture of just a bunch of circles, but I could have put something much uglier next to Michelangelo's David, and asked the question, what is it? Do these belong in the same category? Are these the same concept? And the answer is, of course not. And the fact is that by putting them into the same concept, into the same file folder, you do real cognitive damage. It's not neutral. It truly is destructive to your own cognition. So yes, and now I don't know about the murder. I don't know exactly what happened. I don't know the details, but there's no question that modern art is destructive of the human soul, and it's therefore destructive, and because it's destructive to the human mind, and that equating it with great art, equating it with art at all, makes us poorer spiritually, a lot poorer spiritually. All right, let's see. Ryan says, hi, Iran. My family and I are cruising the Caribbean first week of April, despite COVID. Where do you recommend we dine? We want the San Juan experience and need your culinary advice. Well, I mean, the best place to dine if you can get in, and you have to book now if you're going to do it in April, or book soon, is an old town. It's called Marmalade, and it's a phenomenal restaurant. It's I don't know what a San Juan experience is, but you'll get world class cuisine in a wonderful dining setting, and incredibly friendly staff. It's a great service, and in Old Town. So while you're walking around and enjoying kind of the vibe of the Spanish architecture and the old streets and everything, you in one of those buildings is truly a world class restaurant, a restaurant that I think would get a Michelin star if Michelin ever came to Puerto Rico. So that's where I would definitely have dinner there. If you're going to be there for several days, drop me an email and I can give you other recommendations. But my guess is you're only there for one night if you're on a cruise. Let's see. Can you introduce me to some marriage-minded Sephardic Israeli women, late 20s to early 30s range? Thanks. I would love to, and I think you would enjoy the match. It's worked for me. I don't know. Sorry, I'm just, 20, 30 is the ages of my kids, not the generation that I'm very familiar with, particularly not in Israel. I haven't lived here in a long time. But yes, I would say come over to Israel and search for yourself, look for yourself. Get in touch with Boaz, ask him. He probably knows some. Let's see. He asked that. Alex, do you hold any philosophical questions that objectivism doesn't answer? I know there are quite a few, I think. I don't know any of the big ones, but I'm sure there are smaller ones. And particularly if objectivism is what Ayn Rand wrote, and kind of what Leonard Peikoff wrote in Opa, I'm sure there are a lot of questions out there. I can't think of anything right now, but yeah, I mean, objectivism does not answer every question in philosophy. It doesn't. It answers the big ones, and I think it gives you guidance on where to look and how to approach, most importantly, how to approach answering more questions. But sorry, I just can't think of a question that it doesn't off the cuff. Reggie asks, Why don't we destroy Kremlin and Putin with the aim of removing all nukes from Russia? Because you'd be engaged in a nuclear war. I mean, for the fact is that Russia is not a threat to the United States. Why would you risk nuclear war with Russia? It has what, 4 to 6,000 nuclear warheads. I mean, why would you risk the lives of Americans for something that's not a threat? Putin is not a threat for the U.S. You know, ideally, there would be regime change in Russia by itself. I wouldn't oppose supporting the opposition, given that it's become so authoritarian. But you do not want to go to war with Russia, and I don't think there's any reason to go. I mean, Ayn Rand objected to war with the Soviet Union, which was much worse than Russia, because she didn't think the Soviet Union was a real threat to the United States, and she thought the Soviet Union would collapse upon itself. I think embargoing Russia, I think isolating Russia and Putin, which we've gone a little bit towards, not fully, would cause Russia to collapse of its own. It would cause it to be too poor to be an effective enemy of anybody. And ultimately, I think would necessarily lead to regime change, or at least I hope so. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't. Who cares? But it would definitely weaken Russia to an extent that it's not a threat to anybody. Russia right now is only a threat because it has, it has managed to thrive with trade with the West. Once trade with the West is ended, is stopped, then Russia will struggle dramatically to be able to survive economically and to be able to spend money on the military. I mean, the military is pathetic even with all the spending, and it'll only become more pathetic over time as it becomes poorer. So there's no reason to. And it would be a sacrifice. It would be a sacrifice of potentially sacrifice of American lives, and certainly a sacrifice of American treasure. All right, quickly, we've got 5 last questions. All right. Michael, Tultz Funny says we need 10,000 intellectuals to change the culture 50 years from now. Will we have 10,000 objectivist intellectuals trained and ready to roll? So I disagree with Tal. I think we only need 1,000, 1,000 good ones, 1,000 active ones, 1,000 vocal ones, 1,000 that are willing to go out there and engage with the culture. Will we have 1,000 in 50 years? I think so. We have about 100 now, maybe not 100 like I would like them. Maybe they're on 10 to 20 like I like them, but we have 100. Maybe we'd have 10,000 generally, but 1,000 of the kind of intellectuals I'm talking about. I think there's a chance. Certainly not a certainty. Partially depends on you guys, whether you support the Institute, whether you support its efforts, whether those of you inclined towards intellectual activities engage in them and don't chicken out and go into something else. But you're not going to get 10,000 activist intellectuals in 50 years. But 1,000 you might, and I think 1,000 is enough. Why did Ayn Rand distrust the stock market? It's not that she distrusted it. She didn't. She wasn't. I think the main issue with the stock market is the uncertainty. She just didn't like the risk. Stock market is risky. It goes up and down, and she didn't want the hard-earned money she'd made to go up and down. She wanted to put it in somewhere safe that guaranteed her a certain level of income, and that was good enough for her. Indeed, if she'd invested that money in, she got a lot of money in the 50s and 60s, she would have done quite well in the stock market, particularly if it had gone into, the stock market bottomed in 1982. So, indeed, in her lifetime, stock market did well in the 60s, didn't do great in the 70s. Did okay, but it didn't do great. And in the 80s, early 80s, when she was alive, it did horribly. It wasn't a terrible decision. And from the 80s on, from the 80s till today, the stock market has done phenomenally well. From 82 till today, as interest rates have plummeted and the bond markets have done terribly. In terms of yield, stock market has done very well. But what she didn't like is the volatility, the uncertainty. Harper asks, I'm pretty sure Putin will eventually go nuclear as he gets more and more paranoid and anxious about the world turning on him. I don't think he's suicidal. I just don't think he's suicidal. And I don't think the people around him are suicidal. So I don't think that's going to happen. William, thank you. My skin crawls when I see how liberty has turned into liberal flesh frenzy under the so-called democracy. We prefer strong police, harder jail terms, safer streets, stronger schools, and health. And I'm not sure there's a question there. Thank you. I believe it's political. Western democracy dictates that a majority has a right higher and unequal to a minority like me. Why? Why should I support that? I mean, you shouldn't, but it's a better alternative than any other alternative that exists in the world right now. Western democracy is a better political system than the authoritarians in Russia that don't respect any rights that you have as an individual, or authoritarian China, or any kind of authoritarianism. So while Western democracy is horrible, it's far better than any other system that exists in the world today. Now, we strive for a better system. So we fight Western democracy. We argue against Western democracy. We try to change Western democracy from within to try to bring about a true freedom, a true liberty. I don't know if this is in the context, but you're not going to achieve that by supporting Putin. You're not going to achieve that by supporting Trump. You're not going to achieve that by supporting Orban, who don't give one iota about your liberty as an individual. All right. What is this talk about successes? Who's succeeding who? Okay. Who's the successor they're supposed to be grooming? I don't know who are you guys talking about? All right. Thank you, everybody. It was happy to do a show. Hopefully, I'll have another one tomorrow. Not sure exactly what time. I'll be visiting with my parents most of the day tomorrow. So at some point tomorrow we'll do that. All right, sorry, I'm distracted here by the chat. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you for all the super chatters. I think we made it to not quite a 600, but we made it to 400, which is quite respectable for these kind of unplanned shows. It would be nice to get to 600 in each one of these shows and not make March a significant deficit month, but it's not bad. We'll keep doing these. I'll do the next one probably tomorrow. I've got an event on Monday night and on Wednesday night, and then I'll be in Portugal on Thursday. I'll be meeting some of you guys in Portugal. I'm excited about that. And in Lisbon, and then I've got a conference over the weekend, and then I might do shows from there, depending on the internet connection. I'm glad the internet connection here is decent and we can do this. And then I'll be in London, and I'll definitely do shows from there, although, God, I'm not sure exactly when, because I've got an event every night until very late at night. But I'll certainly on maybe some nights or during the day, or maybe I'll sleep in and do the shows at late at night to fill you in on how things are going in the UK. And I hope to see some of you. I hope to see some of you at the Ayn Rand Institute conference if you're in Europe, hop over to London. It's cheap. The hotel is cheap. If you're in the US and you haven't been to London in a long time, and if you want to kind of stick it to the whole COVID thing, London's a great place to do it. You can fly over there. Come to London. It's going to be a blast. It's going to be a fantastic weekend. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to meeting some of you there, particularly the Europeans. All right, everybody, have a great weekend. I will see you tomorrow, some point during the day. And thank you for all the super chatters. And of course, if you want to support the show, if you want to become a monthly supporter, you can do it at YourOnBrookShow.com/support, Patreon or Subscribestar. Just put in Your On Brook Show. And of course, don't forget to like the show before you leave. If you like the show, there's still many more watchers than there are likers. So do that. And I'll see you all tomorrow. Have a good night. Bye.